Mhm. Perfect. Welcome, everyone. Super excited about today's conversation. I've got the wonderful Samantha here from Three Minds and People Psychology, and I'm really excited to learn more about you because I've just kind of seen what I've seen from the website and I guess that social media realm, and I'm already just so intrigued by all that you have on offer. So I already have a million questions for you, but I would like to start with a little bit more of who you are, the work that you do, and how you got into that, how it all kind of came together to make you this integrated practitioner that you are today, because it's really fascinating. You sit in a really cool intersection.
Okay, where to start? Well, I guess I'll tell you a little bit about my background. So I did the traditional schooling route in psychology, but specialized in organizational psychology. So initially started by doing lots of research around leadership effectiveness and dynamics of teams and organizations. So research and then in the assessment space, so assessing personalities or people for different roles. So that's where I started, and then through my own journey just became very passionate about instead of helping organizations be successful through recruiting the right people, I was more passionate about helping individuals develop to be the best that they could be, and realized through the assessment space I was collecting or giving a lot of information, but the individual wasn't necessarily getting it. So kind of moved into that development space from there. And then from there became really interested in what it was that made people really, really effective. And then that's when I kind of got into emotional intelligence and realized, particularly in the workplace, the people that were really succeeding and doing well had this kind of cherry on the top, and through lots of different research realized that it was this concept of emotional intelligence, which is like self-awareness, self-management, but also people awareness and the ability to also manage people. So then became very passionate about researching that. And so 5 years ago, I set up Three Minds. I think it's 5 years ago now. Yeah, time flies. But before that, actually, I had my own significant life event where my mum came to visit me here in New Zealand and ended up dying in a traffic accident pretty suddenly.
Wow.
So all of a sudden my world was kind of lifted upside down. And I thought it was interesting. I really started studying emotional intelligence and finding people who I would consider to be emotionally intelligent before that event happened, and realized that a lot of them had some significant trauma or event in their life that had forced them to go inwards. Yeah. So I was already doing this kind of research. And then I went through, I would say, the most significant life event that I'd ever been through. And it was really interesting traveling through that grief myself and being overwhelmed with emotion, and being able to reflect on my kind of trainings and research in that space. And it was then that really introduced me to like yoga and meditation, and realizing that I guess the traditional school of psychology, which is very cognitive based, has its limitations in helping people. So then trained in yoga and meditation, and really wanted to bring that mind-body connection together in helping people not just travel through things like grief, but actually helping them just succeed in life in general. So now I'm very passionate about that holistic perspective.
Yeah. Wow. That's a big one. That's a big life event to then have to basically become your own research subject, really, because it's that moment where you're putting it all into practice and having to go through it in such a vulnerable space. I can only imagine. So thank you for sharing that. And within that, I would love to know what that looked like. Like, what was the process of discovering your own emotional intelligence? Because I think within that, people might hear something for them to be like, maybe I don't actually have to go through a big life event to cultivate my own sense. So what did that look like?
Yeah, and that's really important for me, actually, how we bring this education to the masses without people having to go through that. So for me personally, what did it look like? I can't say it was a sleek journey. It was definitely had its ups and downs. I guess initially I started when I was really struggling with so after mum's event, I struggled quite a bit with anxiety. So that was the first thing for me to really try and overcome, to the point that I was kind of sometimes waking up in the middle of the night just really anxious about, in the grand scheme of things, quite minuscule events. So I actually went to see a few different people, and it was through that I realized that, one, I mean, I'm a psychologist, and I found it hard to navigate the complexity of who you see when you're looking for help. And two, just the variety of the type of help that I got, from really not great to pretty amazing. But I still felt that the biggest learnings for me was around somatics. And it's probably because I am a psychologist, so I was trying to, I guess, reframe and use cognition to help me through my grief, and realized that just had its limitations. So I think the biggest eye-opener for me was going on a retreat run by Adele Kingan. Actually, I don't know if you know Adele Kingan, in New Zealand, and that was really eye-opening for me, in terms of just like the grief that was down here, and how your head can really get in the way to really process that. And then I also started to become very curious in, I read the book, The Body Keeps the Score. I don't know if you've read that one.
Absolutely.
And just found that fascinating, as to how we can really get in our own ways, and that there is a limitation to cognitively processing things without actually connecting with the body. And then I went to a transformational breathing session, which was 3 hours, but felt like 10 minutes. And I had a massive, that was a massive eye-opener for me. At that point, I would say that my body was experiencing a lot of grief, and still up here, because after mum's death, there's so many things I had to do. I stayed in a very, I just need to keep going space. And it wasn't until I really slowed down and went to things like that I realized how much kind of grief I was carrying here, to the point that my body particularly down my right hand side of my body, was really aching. I was getting really bad pains in like my shoulder and my hips and my knees, and I wasn't really understanding where it all came from, because I've always been really healthy. And then I went to this transformational breathing session, and I kind of approached it in a very scientific way, going, oh yeah, okay. And the guy was saying, oh, if you've got any grief that's kind of down here, then it's likely that this is going to surface. And I was just like, oh yeah, whatever. And then that session was just mind-blowing, in the fact that, I mean, you're kind of going into a different state of consciousness that's quite hard to explain, but I kind of felt myself like drifting out of my body and looking in on myself, and just went, and my body was literally like shaking, and tears were coming out, and I was just saying my body was significantly processing a lot of trauma that was there. And after that session, I had like, my body started to feel much healthier, and I was just like mind blown with like, what was that? What happened then? And, that was real. That sent me into a real deep space around somatics and mind-body connection. And then went on and did trainings with like Dr. Scott Lyons around somatic stress release. And I did my IREST training, so training in IREST by Richard Miller. That was mind-boggling, thinking about the different kind of brain waves and how relaxed we are, and then how we can access things within our body. And so my journey, that's kind of how my journey went. And then it involved me just slowing down a lot and really taking the time to do my own self-work and my own practice. So then my practice really stepped up a massive notch, and I think it was a lifesaver, really. And now I love that I can bring all of that and notice people quite quickly around what they actually really need, because a lot of people are so headstrong, they think they need knowledge, but actually a lot of people need to just slow down, feel what they feel, and be with themselves. So there's been massive learnings in that space for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really beautiful to hear that interlink between the mind and the body, because I think quite often people go for one or the other. They're like, no, it's got to be talk therapy, cognitive therapy, that, or they're like, no, it's yoga, it's this, it's that, and it's like two camps. But I think it's the melding of all and bringing it all in, because we're dimensional beings and have all of these different layers and aspects that we need to work with. So when you started working with somatics and bringing that into your practice, what have you noticed for people? Like, what's the biggest, I guess, moment for them where they're like, oh, that's what it means to be in my body and to feel? What is that?
Yeah. For me, it's kind of, I call it an energy shift. Mm-hmm. So when people come to me and they're sat in front of me or even on Zoom and they're kind of talking, you can literally kind of like feel the vibration of where they're at when they're talking. And then as soon as usually with people, I ask them to close down their eyes if they feel comfortable. And then like you could literally just feel like the shift of energy as I start to go into more of a somatic space with them. Yeah. And then I feel like they're accessing so much more in that place than if they were kind of just up here rationally talking to me. So, yeah, I mean, I remember the first time I asked one of my corporate clients to kind of, okay, now I just want you to stop and just close down your eyes. And I want you to tell me where you feel that in your body. They're like, what? You know, but after a while, like I just sat there and held space for it and they did too. They're like, oh, actually, wow, I feel this and I feel this. And then there was just so much beautiful insight. And I feel like my coaching practice has really shifted to a whole different level with my ability to do that with my clients.
Yeah, because there's so much in that. There's so much in the moment where people feel their body. And I think with being a trauma-informed yoga facilitator, it's because quite often the physical body is the vehicle with which one has experienced trauma. So they were in their body, and then that comes down to the cellular level. It's remembered. It's a fascial memory at that point. And then to ask them to be in their body again, like that whole journey of finding safety in their body can be a really difficult one, but so liberating. And it's that path and that walking it with them and holding that space for them to really experience their body again. So what has it looked like in terms of, I'm going to go in a completely different direction because I have so many questions, but what has this looked like in corporate? Because I mean, there's certain people that this is going to be so accessible to, and they're like, yep, I'm here for it, movement, all of it, in that space of self-empowerment and thinking about all the layers. But the corporate setting can be a little bit different and a little bit more reserved or conservative around that kind of thing. So what has it looked like to bring in somatics and emotional intelligence into those spaces? Because I think we'll have a lot of people listening who maybe manage teams or are entrepreneurs that work with other freelancers or anything like that and have that interpersonal connection. So what has it looked like in that regard, and how can people maybe level up their sense of emotional intelligence to create safer spaces?
Nice. Okay. So what does it look like? Gentle steps, because usually clients come to me and they'll have this kind of surface level goal. It might be like someone I was speaking to this week. They're like a real creative, and they've come to me because they feel like they need to get more focus rather than their mind going here, there, and everywhere. Or somebody the other day was talking to me about coming to me because they're a pretty senior leader, but they've realized that their communication strategy isn't effective. And one of the things that I'm really seeing through COVID now, and particularly with Jacinda being who she is that there's a lot of people who are asking me, how do I lead strongly, but with empathy? Wow. And that's a real big one that I'm working with people at the moment. And for me to have empathy with others, first you need to feel what's going on here. And a lot of these very more autocratic leaders that I would work with have got used to being successful through one way of leading, and now they're really facing a bit of a brick wall with it. So this empathy thing is a big one. And for me, I just talk to them about kind of, first of all, so I start with the cognitive. So they love theory and science. So I'll talk by explaining the difference between, I mean, a lot of people don't even really know the difference between a thought, a feeling, and emotion. So I'll give them the science behind that. talk about the neuroscience of the brain and evolution. And when I'm looking at you and I'm reading you, you know, body language is much more than what you're saying, and your body language is so linked to your unconscious thoughts and beliefs. So without you really understanding you and your feelings, you're only going to be so effective in a leadership position. So I really start with selling it from that cognitive scientific place. And then there's a lot of trust building. I think that's something I do quite well, trust building with my clients, and also holding up the mirror. So I'm quite good at seeing what's going on and then being like, okay, well, what I'm seeing from you is this. And they're like, oh, yeah, actually that is what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think that trust is really important. And then when they're on board and the trust is there, then they're like, okay, I'll trust you to take me on this journey in whatever way you think going to be best. But I guess I've been in this field for 15 years now, assessing and developing people for 15 years. So it's quite easy for me to look at someone and kind of read not just what's going on the surface, but what's going on underneath the surface. And I think that's my biggest power. And then I'll adapt and I'll bring in all these different tools. So I'm trained in like NLP, I'm trained in somatics, I'm trained in like traditional coaching and all these psychological models. So I'll kind of pull in, and psychometrics for people who want to start with some maths and some rational data. So I'll pull in what needs to be there for them initially, and then I'll take them on a journey of where I feel that they need to go to get real significant transformation. And the retreats that I run are really just that in a package. So the 5-day retreats I run, I usually find corporate leaders come along and they're in this kind of busy mindset, and, you know, they're fidgeting because they're not used to being in a relaxing retreat situation. And then I'll tell them about the science of exactly what I feel that their brain and body is doing right now. And then they'll be like, okay, there's some comfort in this. And then they go on the journey. I usually find like 3 days in, their whole vibration is just like dropped to a level of real openness for learning. And then we can do some magical stuff around like rewiring beliefs that aren't serving them, and giving them like a real depth of insight into their habits and their functioning. So I would say taking them on a journey. That's how I do it. But at the initial sale, you have to speak their language, is in the business corporate world, which I guess that's my background, that I can speak at a very senior leadership level about business and people in business, like statistics, and then take them on a journey of seeing the bigger picture.
Amazing. So within that, if somebody is looking to be that empathetic yet strong and powerful leader, what are the 3 first things that you tell them that's like, this is where you have to like lean into or step out of? And how do they start that space? Because it's such a shift right now. People are, you notice language changing, like with the likes of Jacinda, but then like there's the work of Brene Brown and what she's doing for leadership, and Simon Sinek, and you see this language actually starting to change, and people are like, oh, okay, there's something to this. But like, what are 3 kind of tangible things that people could take on right now and say, okay, this is my first 3 steps towards courageous leadership?
Nice. Space would be one, because unless you give yourself space and quiet time, you're never going to get to this level. So you have to create space. There's a beautiful clip by Dr. Adam Fraser called The Third Space, which is the importance of creating time in between things to just breathe, check what's going on here.
Oh, I love that.
Reset, and then move on. And I love that concept of the third space is so important. Through that third space, then you can start to get curious about your fears, because I'm a big believer that we're all born with a real want to connect and be at one with each other, which I guess is the foundation of empathy. It's through layers of fear that we forget how to do that. So it's once you've created that space, it's then getting curious about the fears that are stopping you leaning into other people or being empathic. and then actually it might be working with someone, if you're not able to do it yourself, to face some of those fears. So for instance, a lot of the leaders that I work with, when we dig really deep into their timelines and their backgrounds and why they lead like they do, there's usually something really pivotal about their upbringings that have given them a belief. For instance, somebody I was working with not long ago had a situation in their family where they were in this like beautiful, they lived on a farm, and they're in this, for him it was a beautiful upbringing, and then all of a sudden kind of the bank came knocking on the door, took away the family farm, and then from that point on, like, parents split up, everything fell to pieces. So he had such a strong belief around financial security, so to the point that financial security had become a value that was leading his whole life, to the point that actually now, through most people's eyes, he was more financially secure than most people, but still was living through that fear. And that it was that was stopping him leaning in or being empathic to people, because for him it was about getting the job done because that's going to hit the money, not seeing the longer term picture of building the relationships and doing stuff that actually was more about the relationship building than getting the job done and hitting the figures. So actually to get him to change behavior rather than go, okay, this is a model or this is a way I think you should operate, it was the biggest revelation for him was getting him to see where his fear had come from, and that it was a fear, and to get him to question his belief as to whether that was still serving him, or whether it was time now to let that go and think about what he actually wants for the rest of his life. So facing those fears is a big step too. So in summary, I would say create the space, get curious, particularly about the fears and how they're leading you in your life, and then face into those fears.
And I love that you mention the support for that third one of, yes, sometimes we are going to be able to face them in our own time and way, but it's so important to lean on the supports that we have and the resources that are available to us. So I think that's a really poignant thing to highlight for sure. And that creating space, I'm going to have to check out that video clip, and we'll link out to it when I find it, because that sounds like exactly what is so needed. And I'm also curious in that what I've found is coming out of, even just say, coming out of COVID, more people have said that when space was created for them, so they didn't choose to create this space, it was created for them, and it was so confronting, so overwhelming, and a really unsafe place for them to be because it wasn't chosen, right? Mm-hmm. So how do people start to get comfortable with that space? Because I even remember when I was when I was in the corporate background, I was go, type A, busy all the time, not a moment of silence. Everything was packed. And then over time, when I started to bring that space in the beginning, it was hard. It was really hard, because then yourself starts to speak to you and you're like, oh, I don't want to listen to that yet. I'm not ready. So how do people find that comfort in the space that's so needed and so important? What does that transition look like?
Great question. This is why I love retreats so much, because I do find that it's so overwhelming for many people to go into that space and to be quiet and to sit with oneself, particularly if you've got a habit of always being busy. And COVID's really bringing to the surface a lot of this, which is why we're seeing a lot of incline in mental health, because people just don't actually know how to just be with themselves. They've been running away from themselves for a long time. If you can get support, I'm a big fan of retreats, because basically what's happening is you're winding down. So the fact that you can go on retreat and people are there looking after you as you're winding down, they're taking away all the pain of trying to do that yourself. I just think I personally have had the biggest insights through those kind of retreat settings, where you can remove all of other life that might pull you in different directions, and you can just be, and there's a team of people to help you just be, who can really offer you that support. If you haven't got the luxury of doing that, then some online guided meditations might help. I'm a big fan of like Headspace to get you started in things like meditation, or I'm a massive fan of iRest, and Richard, the iRest, the online iRest website offers some iRest recordings, which I think are great. So you can do recordings, and just start small. Just go like, I'm going to give myself 3 minutes every day to just be with whatever's here, and then maybe I'm just going to write on whatever I experience. Because usually what becomes overwhelming is the interlink between the feelings that you've got and then the thoughts. And usually what becomes overwhelming is you have a feeling which might be, say, sadness or loneliness or whatever it might be. But then what becomes overwhelming isn't just the feeling in isolation, it's the thoughts you assign to that feeling. Like, I shouldn't be sad, or I shouldn't be depressed, or nobody else is, or it's just me, or there's something wrong with me. That's the stuff that becomes overwhelming. So it's the thoughts or beliefs that you put upon yourself, which is why actually the basis of all emotional intelligence comes down to self-love. Because if we can always hold on to self-love, we can get curious with these like really horrible emotions, and it doesn't have to become overwhelming. Unless you do have a significant kind of trauma response, which triggers, you know, that's different. So you would always need support in that space. But for a lot of people, learning the art of curiosity, and there's a beautiful talk as well by Eduardo, I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, Eduardo Brucheno, on the power of belief. And he talks about the fixed versus growth mindset. And I think that's something to be curious about, because the curiosity that I'm talking about that you should approach your feelings with is a learned behavior. We either learn to be very fixed and call ourselves we're broken, or we're well, or there's something wrong with us, or there's something right with us. But if we can learn the growth mindset, then we can lean into every experience we have with curiosity. And that's where the power really is, in terms of us being able to sit with whatever is going on around us. So meditations, just 3 minutes of sitting in silence, doing some journal writing, are all things that over time will build this. If you haven't got the pleasure of going to a retreat or yoga training, even, you know, something that's supportive and lovely and really embraces you to go into your body.
And holds that space for you. And I think it is that like bite-sized chunks is so key in the beginning. Because if you say like, I'm going to meditate for 1 hour every morning, you're almost just like, you're setting, that's a mountain to climb. That is difficult. Where if it's like 3 minutes, you're like, okay, I can do this for 3 minutes. And then maybe it's 3.5, and then it's 4. And over time, what I found is I started to crave it more and more. Like, as those neural pathways were changing and things were shifting, I was like, oh no, I actually like this now. And it built and evolved and grew. And I really like what you say about that curiosity. Like, I think that's my favorite word. I think that's like the word that I live into the most, because it's what helped me restore a lot of parts of myself and heal parts of myself that I really struggled with, because I tried to think my way through it, or I tried to yoga my way through it. And everything I did was I was like, well, I can just fix this. I can just do this thing. And it really wasn't until I found that sense of curiosity and non-attachment to an outcome, and just saying, okay, what would it be like to notice what I'm feeling, and to just let that be okay in this moment, rather than labeling and making it right or wrong or anything in between. And it was, and I think with curiosity comes that gentle compassion for yourself. And that was the first step towards self-love for me. Because when people said self-love, I was like, wow, what? Like, how do you love something that feels broken? How do you do that? So I really had to start with that compassion, and then compassion turned into respect, and then respect turned into care, and then care turned into love. And then I was like, oh, I get it. It really had to be a journey. And then within that, it's still a journey. Like some days it's still a sense of love, but some days you're like, I love this a little bit less today. And then other days you're like, no, I really love this. So I love that idea around curiosity. So thank you for highlighting that. So what's been the biggest, I guess the biggest moment of clarity for you in terms of how powerful these somatics are in regards to their healing power? Because I think it's getting a lot more attention now of how emotion, trauma, and memory is stored in our body. And I think we're really starting to highlight the fact that we actually do have to move things through us and out of us. And there's all of these like schools of thought around you have to relive it in order to release it. You have to do this like breath work or it's thoughts, like all of these things. But what was the moment for you where you're like, no, it's this somatic experiencing that comes into play? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, totally. I'd like to come back to your point of it's a journey, because it's not like I did one thing and then I was like, oh, perfect. I think it's a combination of all of it that's been successful, and actually now it's a part of my life. Like, and I'd encourage people to actually change their mindset to view this as part of your life, you know, like brushing your teeth in the morning. It just becomes part of you. So I wouldn't ever be without it now. Some form of meditation or somatics, you know, whatever shape or form. But I think that transformational breathing session was like next level eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
Because it really, you know, there was no talking involved. It was a pure felt sense of the experience of everything.
Wow.
That couldn't be faked, or, you know, it was just there. And I had to face into the fact that there was a lot more in my unconscious mind and in my body than my conscious mind was clever enough to realize. And I think that also enables you to let go of the ego a little bit in all of this and just trust and go on that journey. So I'd say that was a massive part of my learning.
Mm-hmm.
Yoga, just and you know, I used to just go to yoga classes, and then I did my yoga training. And for me, you know, I teach in the true form of yoga. It's intertwined with everything I do, but in terms of running a yoga class, it's not something I do. Mm-hmm. But the going on the yoga training was massive for me, because I really learned about well, the type of yoga I did was embodied yoga, and it really taught me so much. So that was a combination with it. Then the Irish training, which kind of brought, because Richard Miller is a clinical psychologist, that was really great for me, because it brought all my knowledge in psychology with the somatics together, in like a way that I could really grasp and use. So that was powerful. It was actually my mum's birthday yesterday, and I do this thing where I write a blog for her birthday every year, which is like a letter to mum, because after the first year of her going, you know, I was overwhelmed with emotions on her birthday, and the psychologist I was seeing at the time was like, well, why don't you write her a letter? So I did. And then I actually realized that these kind of things will benefit other people who are experiencing grief. So it's kind of something I do. But in that process of writing the letter, what's beautiful for me is it allows me to reflect on my journey over the year, because sometimes the little bits, they just feel like they're not getting anywhere. And then if you earmark it like every year to do a reflection of how far I've come, you realize that you've come so far. And you know, there's not usually one single event. There's definitely certain events that push you a little bit further, but I think it is in the everyday commitment to yourself and that self-love, and being able to honor yourself, to do some form of meditation or create the third space or do some somatics on yourself, that becomes most powerful.
Oh, that's such a beautiful space to actually look back yearly, because it is like when you go day to day, you're like, oh, I'm just doing the things. And then when you look back and reflect, you're like, holy, how did I get here? And then you can actually, it's kind of like that hindsight thing. When you look back, you're like, wow, I did it. And then it shows you the things that you can get through. It shows you your resilience. It shows you your strength. And I think that's a really important thing along that journey, because then it reminds you, okay, I've been through hard things before. I can go through hard things that come along. And it's that really beautiful point of inner reserve to say, yeah, okay, I can do this. Amazing. So within somatics, I would like to get your definition of somatics for those who maybe don't understand it or haven't really heard of it, because I'm really bad for that. I can just say words and be like, yep, everyone knows this thing. And people are like, no, we don't. So your definition of somatics, and then if there's one tool or one practice that you have found the most beneficial for you that maybe people can do on their own time and experience for themselves to get into maybe that sense of curiosity.
Yeah, beautiful. So my definition of somatics is, I mean, I come back to the phrase to somatize it. And when I'm talking about somatizing it, I'm talking about feeling what you're talking about. So if I take an example, I can talk about, okay, I've had a really busy, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. And you can talk about it and you can talk about it and talk about it, but it's all kind of still up here. So when I somatize it, for me, I close down my eyes. You don't have to close down your eyes, but I find it a lot easier to go inwards when I close down my eyes and just sit there and just do a bit of a body scan and go, okay, overwhelmed. Where do I feel that in my body? So when I'm somatizing it, I'm feeling it. I'm literally trying to like locate how that feels in my body. And it could be anywhere in your body. So it kind of forces you to go into a bit of a body scan. And feel where I feel it. And usually overwhelmed for me, I do feel it in my shoulders. So I'm kind of doing it now. So one of the interesting things as well, we can't think and feel at the same time. So we kind of do this micro exchange between thinking and feeling. So when I was talking to you, really thinking space, but now I've literally just through that exercise come really into my body and recognize, yeah, I do have tension here and here. And it almost feels like there's a weight. It almost feels like there is the weight of the world on the shoulders, like here. So then I can ask myself some questions, go, okay, well, given my somatic experience is a real pressure of the shoulders or a weight on the shoulders, what do I want to do, or what do my shoulders want to do in this situation? And actually they want to go back. So they want to do a bit of a roll. They want to do a bit of a release. And then you can get really creative with it. I mean, we're talking about overwhelm and stress, but with more significant things like loneliness and fear, you can do lots of different stuff. So you can punch a punch bag if that's what you feel like you need to do, if you've got some anger there. Or for my shoulders, like I love just kind of rolling my shoulders back and going for a walk and just kind of letting them out and feel the freedom. So a lot of people, if they're dealing with like overwhelm and stress, what they do is they try and manage all the things, the external events that are causing them overwhelm and stress. But what we're experiencing through COVID at the moment, you know, COVID is the thing that's causing people overwhelm and stress. And you know what? You can't manage that. We're in this place of uncertainty and ambiguity, and there's a lot of stuff outside our sphere of control. But what you can control, what is within your sphere of control, is the felt sense. So for instance, I can manage the feeling in my shoulders and create more openness, and an openness here, which is the somatics, which is the body. And I'm not actually altering anything out here. But what I am, through doing and spending time on the felt sense of what I'm experiencing, is that I'm bringing myself back into an equilibrium, and I'm directly managing that fight flight response that's happening, and making sure that that stays calm. And if you can really grasp that and do that regularly, then actually you can get to the point where you don't, so much stuff can come your way, and like life stresses just constantly, but you can keep yourself really good and really centered here. And to me, so that's, to me, is the definition of somatics. It's working, Dr. Scott Lyons calls it, there's many doorways in. And a lot of people use the cognitive doorway, particularly the people I work with in the business world. They're, you know, heavy thinkers, but there's many other doorways in, and directly through somatics or the felt sense of the experience is a beautiful doorway into helping us cope and build resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that, the visual of being able to actually take that time, because that took you what, like that was like maybe a minute that you dropped into that space of, okay, noticing this labeling of an emotion, and then where is that in my body? And that exploration again, that curiosity around, okay, what is it? What does it feel like? And is it trying to tell me something? Is it, what do I want to do with that now? And then that in itself helps to transmute it, because it doesn't stay the same. It changes and evolves. And I think that piece of like embodiment for people, that moment of like empowerment to be like, oh, I can shift this, or I can work with it and notice it, and either choose to be in that or choose to step out of it if it is too overwhelming sometimes. And I think that's a really powerful tool for people to be able to take away, because you can do it at any point.
Oh, totally. Even just doing that now, actually, I feel better. So,
right.
So thank you.
Yeah. Right?
Thank you for reminding me to do a bit of somatics today.
Yeah. And I think that's the really cool part, is that it's always available because we're physically in our bodies. So that tool is quite literally always there. And it can become second nature over time, where you find yourself in a situation and you just notice that you just drop in automatically, and you're like, oh, okay, this situation actually isn't for me, because what I'm feeling right now is a boundary being crossed, or a challenge, or whatever it might be. Or you can get into that space of excitement and you're like, oh no, I do want this. And building that felt sense, I think it was one of the most empowering things for me, for sure, that reconnection to how I feel my body, because I'm very heady a lot of the time, and very thought-based and rational and logical. And I was like, oh, and then there's feelings, and the feelings and emotions and thoughts and the cycles that we go through and how they feed into each other. And I think that was another really important point that you had mentioned a lot earlier, with the difference between thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And I think that distinction would be really cool to get into, because I don't know if a lot of people realize their cyclical nature, and how one feeds into the physiology of the other, and then it just keeps kind of recycling itself, and you can get caught in that. So do you think it would be useful to kind of define them and help people navigate on how they can break that cycle? Because I think somatics comes into play a lot in that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because even for me to be able to do that exercise, it's based on me having an understanding of the difference between those. Because a lot of people, when they first start doing it, they're like, what do you mean? Like, you know, so it's really great to define. So let's start with emotion, because I think actually in a way, emotion in its purest sense is the easiest one to define, because you can define it as energy in motion. So if everyone just like spends a moment now just checking where their energy level is, and you can literally do that like through your pulse. It's a bit like the vibration or the amount of energy that's pumping around you at that given moment. So if I just do it myself. Yeah, I'd say I'm kind of in a heightened energy space. I'm definitely in a heightened energy space. And again, you will start to, if you do this regularly, you'll start to understand where your kind of baseline is, and what's a lower energy space and what's a higher energy space. So emotion in its purest sense really is that we are designed, and again, it comes back to this fight, flight, gear up, gear down. Our emotions, our energy in motion is gearing us up or gearing us down. But then our emotion coupled with our thoughts can define it as negative or positive. So actually it's the thought that we assign to it. So for instance, if we recognize that we're in a real low energy place, we don't really want to feel like getting up, like everything's in this kind of low point down here. Now that could be restorative, or it could be depressive. You decide what thought you put on that, and how you decide your thought on it comes to your past beliefs and your past experiences.
Yeah.
So actually I see a lot of people who really need to rest and restore, because if you think of us like batteries, we need to top up and recharge.
Yeah.
And if you're used to working on go, like a lot of us just in society are at the moment, we don't take proper time to rest and restore. And then we end up, if we don't properly do it, we end up crashing.
Yeah.
So even just starting to recognize that, and your emotion, is it up, is it down, like what is my energy doing right now? And if you get really deep on that, you start to come to like all the fuel that you're putting in you and how you maximize your energy so that you can operate in that space if that's where you want to be. But recognizing that we do need to top up and top down. Our feelings, this comes down to I feel what my energy is doing. I'm feeling that through my senses.
Yeah.
If we just do an exercise, if you think about your left hand, I want you to think about your left hand. Mm-hmm. And then I want you to feel your left hand. Now, there should be a real subtle difference. One is usually quite headstrong and thought-based. So it might sound a little bit like, oh, well, it's got 5 fingers on it. It looks like it's got a little bit of a tan this weekend. All that kind of stuff. The feeling doesn't have language. The feeling is the throbbing, the heat of the hand. What it feels to almost be in the hand. So there's almost like this feeling of kind of going into the hand.
Yeah.
In a true felt sense, there isn't language to that. I mean, there's language afterwards as I'm debriefing with you, but to actually feel your hand, there's almost like a quietness to that subtlety. So in order for us to make decisions in life, which is basically what we're doing, we're all just trying to survive, we need our thoughts, which are really based on our beliefs and our past experiences and this constant narrative that we're playing over in our mind. But we also need the feelings too, the feeling of, is it hot, is it cold? Is it high vibration, is it low vibration? How does that feel on my skin? How does it feel inside here? How does it feel when my heart's pumping? Someone's just said something horrible to me. How does that feel? Not the narrative, but how does it actually feel in my heart? Like, have my shoulders moved in and I've gone into protective mode? And then the more we access our feelings, the more we realize that because our feelings are linked to our limbic brain, or the emotional storage of our brain, there's a lot more information there than will ever be in our conscious mind. Which is this saying around getting out of your own way. Because if you're constantly cognitive or you're constantly conscious, you're actually missing out on all the subtleties that are coming through the felt sense. So does that explain the difference between them?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I really love that you articulated the fact that there is no language until after, because I think that's really important, because I think that can help us differentiate between the narrative that we put onto things. Because in the moment, what's happening, when you feel into it, you then tell the story around it. So what story are you telling? What does that actually look like? Because in the moment, there is no language. It is a felt sensation. And you're like, okay, that just is. And then we story write. And we say, well, what I'm feeling is XYZ. It's like, is that?
Yeah.
Is that it? And what is it around? The story that we tell is directly based on those past patterns and beliefs and the systems and structures that we're in and where we find ourselves in time and space, basically. And I think that can be one of the most liberating things to realize.
Yes.
Because if I think about, like, I often give the example of 2 people are getting ready to bungee jump, and both in the exact same scenario, one person is so excited and they're like, this is going to be the best thing ever. And the other person is like, I'm terrified. I want nothing to do with this. they're both having feelings. They're both having some stress response in their body. But one person's story is, this is exciting and I'm going to love it. And the other person's story is, I'm terrified and I don't want to do this. And that's the narrative that they place on that feeling. So it's like, what does it actually look like? And how do we get to the point where we can rewrite those thoughts? And I think that's the exciting place, is that it's possible. We can rewrite that narrative. And it takes time. It takes support and working with different practitioners and different modalities. But the fact that that's possible, I just think is the coolest. We don't have to be stuck in that.
Yes.
Because if you think about it, like if I think about the stories I used to tell around my feelings, thoughts, and emotions, completely different today. But I'm still having that same felt sense in my body. I've just created a different relationship to it. And I think that's the difficult part for people to understand until they've experienced it. Because again, we're just intellectualizing and saying, this is the thing, but it's not until you have that felt sense and you're like, oh, that's the moment. I got it. Yeah. Really cool. Thank you for breaking that down. I think that's a really good place for people to kind of sink into and again, bring that sense of curiosity back of, what story am I telling? How am I narrating this life? Yeah. I love that.
And the power to rewrite the story. And fair enough, it does take time to break the habits of our thoughts, but you can. I've seen it done wonderfully. I will say that I've definitely rewritten a lot of my internal thoughts and story, and it's been mind altering. And Sean Acker does a beautiful TED talk on he calls it the positive advantage, and actually the benefit of rewriting the story for the positive. Like, why wouldn't you write it for the positive? Because of the benefits. He talks about the physiological benefits of staying in the positive in terms of what our brains and bodies are doing as well. So
I love that, because that's exactly it. Why wouldn't you?
Yes.
What do you actually have to lose?
Yeah.
Why not? I have one final question for you, and I'm really excited to see where you go with this, because it's so different for everyone. And it doesn't have to be anything along the lines of what we talked about so far. It can be completely different. But it's what I ask to everyone at the end, and think about it either locally or globally. But if you think of how things are right here and now, is there one big change that you would want to see made, or one big norm that you would want to disrupt? What is it and why?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. I actually think it is creating space, because from creating space, there's so much power in that. So I would love people to actually embrace the space that's being created. If it is, I mean, everybody's in different light, thrown into different lives right now. Some of us have more space, some of us have less. So that's a hard one itself. But create the space for yourself. And I combine that with less judgment. And the reason I combine that is because what we see is that people go into more of a judgmental space when they have less time. So it's harder to be curious when you have less time.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can give yourself time, you can afford more curiosity. So I really would love just the whole world to just slow down and just go inward, slow down and be curious, not just with ourselves, but with each other. And I just think so much of the world's problems would be solved through curiosity, instead of this quick judgment that we make, and the fear that we operate out of. Someone said that around 80 to 90% of the world's problems come through a lack of really seeking to understand each other. And I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah, I can understand that for sure, because we're so quick to think about what we want to say next and how we want to reply and respond to something. And we actually haven't even sat and listened to that person. We haven't even given them space to be them and have their own experience and listen to understand what they're saying. and then we just like go about our lives. So it's not even just creating space for ourselves, but holding space for others, like space, just, and then find spaciousness in your body as well. Yeah, I really, really love that. And I love that you couple it with non-judgment, because that's exactly it. It's again that narrative. When you say to yourself, oh, I did nothing today, I accomplished nothing, versus I rested. I took time for me. I took a mental health day. Like those are so different, but again, that same experience. So when you can create that space and hold it for yourself and then label it in a compassionate way, like, talk about transformation. Absolutely. Samantha, thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much for just going on this like rabbit hole of goodness with me and just humoring my questions, because I've absolutely loved it and I've gained so much. And I think there's such a beautiful transition occurring, and this open-mindedness that's kind of sparking more and more to dive into the physical body and to talk more about emotional intelligence and felt sense and what that is. So I love that you're doing that work, and bringing it into corporate, I think, is just phenomenal. And that ripple effect is going to be so huge. So thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for taking this time.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you.